Welcome back everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this series, called What If Goku Remembered the Saiyans? My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like and subscribe to the page. Also leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin. Kakarot was already up before the sun, the cool morning air sharp against his skin as he tugged on his fresh fighting uniform. It was only 5 in the morning, but lounging around wasn't an option, not with the androids looming 3 years away. The fate of Earth depended on him being ready. His first destination was Bardock's room. Reaching the door, he knocked briskly before calling out, "Son, wake up, time to train." A muffled, groggy voice answered. "What? It's too early. Get up," Kakarot insisted, his voice firm. A few minutes passed before Bardock shuffled out of the room, his hair disheveled and eyes half closed. He yawned, rubbing the sleep from his face as he leaned against the doorframe. "What's the deal, Dad?" he muttered, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Can't this wait until a decent hour?" "There's no time to waste," Kakarot replied, his tone urgent. "There's a serious threat coming to Earth in 3 years, and we need to be ready." That woke Bardock up a little. "A threat?" he repeated, still trying to piece things together. "I'll explain over breakfast," Kakarot said, turning toward the kitchen. "But once we're done eating, we start training. No excuses." Bardock grumbled under his breath, but the determination in his father's voice left no room for argument. He followed reluctantly, knowing there was no getting out of it. Vegeta finished his 1000th push-up, the relentless pull of 150 times Earth's gravity, making every movement feel like a battle. Sweat dripped from his brow as he pushed himself to his feet, refusing to let exhaustion claim him. The thought of Kakarot, that low-class warrior, achieving the legendary Super Saiyan form before him, gnawed at his pride. To make matters worse, even Raditz had managed to ascend. With a sharp growl, Vegeta unleashed a flurry of kicks and punches at the empty air, each strike fueled by his frustration. In his mind, he wasn't just training, he was pummeling Kakarot into the dirt. "This is unacceptable," Vegeta muttered under his breath, his voice filled with venom. A Saiyan prince does not trail behind commoners. For the past 2 months, Vegeta had been holed up in Capsule Corporation's state-of-the-art gravity chamber, pushing his body to its limit. The chamber itself was a gift, or perhaps a taunt, from Kakarot, who'd casually dropped off a new model capable of reaching up to 300 times Earth's gravity. Vegeta scoffed at the memory. "As if I needed his charity," he muttered, wiping his face with the back of his glove. Still, he couldn't deny the chamber's quality. As the prince of all Saiyans, he deserved nothing but the best. And with this new setup, it was only a matter of time before he surpassed both Kakarot and Raditz. He clenched his fists, a determined smirk playing on his lips. Chi-Chi sat at the sleek Capsule Corp dining table, cradling a steaming cup of coffee between her hands. Across from her, Bulma leaned back in her chair, her blue hair framing her face as she sipped her own mug. They'd been spending more time together lately, especially after Chi-Chi caught Yamcha sneaking around with another woman. Having a friend to confide in was comforting, and Bulma, ever the good listener, didn't seem to mind the company. "So," Bulma asked with a mischievous grin, "any new prospects on the horizon?" Chi-Chi's cheeks flushed pink, and she glanced down at her coffee. "I'm not sure I'm ready to move on just yet," she admitted, her voice soft, "but if we're being honest, I think Vegeta's kinda cute." Bulma blinked in surprise. "Really? Vegeta?" She couldn't hide the note of disbelief in her voice. "I always figured he was kind of a, well, you know, a jerk." Chi-Chi laughed lightly, her blush deepening. "Yeah, I know he's got an attitude, but have you seen him? Those muscles? He's like a walking statue. I thought Yamcha was ripped, but Vegeta puts him to shame." Bulma tilted her head thoughtfully. "Well, you're not wrong about the muscles," she admitted. "Kakarot's no slouch in that department either." "You're lucky," Chi-Chi said, glancing up with a small smile. "Having such a great guy." Bulma chuckled, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, he has his moments, but let's talk more about you. Why Vegeta, of all people? What about one of the other fighters?" Chi-Chi wrinkled her nose. "Raditz? Too much hair. I'm not into the whole long-haired thing. And Nappa? Ugh, he's just old and bald." Bulma burst into giggles. "Okay, yeah, I can't argue with that. Nappa's definitely not a looker." The two women shared a laugh, the conversation flowing easily as they delved into the quirks of the people in their lives. Vegeta strode into the Capsule Corp kitchen, his face set in its usual stoic expression. His muscles were taut and glistening with sweat, evidence of his grueling workout session. His dark eyes flicked briefly to the two women seated at the table. Kakarot's mate, Chi-Chi, and the blue-haired Bulma. They were sipping coffee and chatting quietly, but Vegeta could feel their gazes linger on him as he crossed the room.
Do Earth women do anything besides drink coffee and stare? He thought irritably, though he noticed the way Chi-Chi quickly stood when he entered. Can I get you some water? Chi-Chi offered, holding out a glass filled with ice water. Vegeta didn't reply, but accepted the glass with a short nod. He tilted his head back and drank, the cold liquid sliding down his throat and cutting through the heat of his training session. It was satisfying, but Vegeta didn't waste time lingering on pleasantries. Handing the empty glass back to her, he turned and started toward his quarters, eager for a long shower to wash away the day's efforts. Can I get you something to eat? Chi-Chi called after him, her voice polite but hopeful. That would be fine, woman, Vegeta replied brusquely, not even glancing back as he continued down the hallway.
Behind him, Chi-Chi's brow furrowed slightly. My name is Chi-Chi, she muttered under her breath, watching him disappear around the corner. Bulma raised an eyebrow at her friend, a knowing smirk tugging at her lips. You've got your hands full with that one.
Across the compound, Raditz's long hair whipped behind him as he twisted to dodge Nappa's massive fist. The bald Saiyan's punch missed by mere inches, but Raditz wasn't quick enough to avoid the knee that followed. The blow connected hard with his midsection, knocking the air from his lungs and forcing a cough of blood from his mouth. Nice shot, Raditz admitted with a grimace, stumbling back. Didn't know you'd mastered Kaioken that fast.
I've been working on it, Nappa said with a smirk, his hulking frame radiating confidence. Figured it might catch you off guard. Without waiting for a reply, Nappa closed the gap and delivered a powerful right hook to Raditz's jaw, sending him flying across the gravity chamber. Raditz slammed his boots against the floor, getting to a stop before he hit the wall. Shaking off the impact, he grinned through bloodied lips.
Not bad, he admitted, but I'm not down yet. With a burst of speed, Raditz launched himself back at Nappa, fists blazing as the two warriors clashed in the center of the room. The air vibrated with the force of their strikes, though both held back enough to avoid completely destroying their surroundings. The last time they'd gone all out, they'd wrecked the gravity chamber so thoroughly that Bulma had needed an entire week to build a replacement. Still, even at 150 times Earth's gravity, the limitations didn't deter them. Raditz flipped through the air, adjusting his stance as he re-engaged, refusing to let Nappa get the upper hand again.
At the end of a long day, Kakarot and Bardock trudged into the Capsule Corp dining room, the smell of dinner wafting through the air. Bardock was battered and bruised from head to toe, his movements stiff as he collapsed into a chair at the table. Kakarot, by contrast, was barely winded, his powerful frame bearing only a few scuffs. Despite Bardock's progress, the gap between their strengths remained as wide as ever. How was training? Bulma asked from the kitchen, peeking out as she set a dish on the counter.
Neither answered right away. They were too busy devouring the spread laid out before them, eating with the kind of speed and fervor that always left Bulma in awe. Bardock managed a reply between mouthfuls, though. It was all right, he mumbled, shoving another bite into his mouth. Bulma couldn't help but smile at the sight. She'd grown used to the Saiyans' enormous appetites, but recently, she'd noticed her own cravings had increased as well. She rested a hand on her stomach, her thoughts drifting to the tiny Saiyan baby growing inside her. Must be taking after his father already, she mused. We're heading outside tomorrow, Kakarot said, his voice carrying easily over the sounds of chewing. We need more space to really go all out. The gravity room's fine for endurance, but it's too fragile for sparring. Bulma wiped her hands on a towel, walking over to the table with an air of excitement. I've been working on something that might solve that problem, she said, pulling a small box from the counter. Since Raditz and Nappa wrecked the last chamber, I thought it might be time for an upgrade. She opened the box to reveal a set of sleek, high-tech equipment, a belt, paired with wrist and ankle bands. What's that? Kakarot asked, his eyes wide with curiosity as he leaned closer to the equipment Bulma had revealed. Bulma grinned, clearly proud of her invention. It's a personal gravity device, she explained, holding up the sleek belt and wristbands. You wear these, adjust the dial, and it creates a personal gravity field around you. It's like being inside a gravity chamber, but completely portable. Kakarot's face lit up. That's amazing! So we can train anywhere now? Exactly, Bulma replied with a nod. You're no longer limited to the chamber, though of course, you'll still need to be careful where you're training. The field will affect you, but it won't protect the environment around you from any collateral damage. Bardock studied the devices thoughtfully, picking up one of the wristbands. How durable are these? He asked, turning it over in his hands. I made them from the strongest metals I could get my hands on, Bulma said confidently. They'll withstand a lot of abuse. Just try not to let any energy blasts hit them directly. Too much force in the wrong place could compromise the circuitry. This is incredible, Kakarot said, testing the weight of the belt. How high does it go? Can it handle 200 times Earth's gravity? Bulma shook her head. Not yet. These are prototypes, so they're capped at 100 times Earth's gravity for now. But I'm already working on improving the technology. Once I refine the miniaturization process, I'm sure I'll be able to push them much higher. That's still amazing, Bardock said, a grin breaking across his face. Thanks, Mom. Bulma's expression softened, her proud smirk giving way to a more tender smile. Anything to keep my baby safe from the androids, she thought, though she didn't say it out loud.
In the distant future, Celia stepped out of the cramped cockpit of her time machine, the familiar dimness of the underground bunker greeting her. The hum of machinery and muffled voices from nearby chambers filled the air. Her mission to the past had gone as planned, but unease still gnawed at her. No matter how much she tried to reassure herself, she couldn't shake the feeling that it might not have been enough. She walked through the bunker's narrow corridors until she reached the main chamber. There, she saw an older Bulma, crouched beside a wounded survivor, carefully bandaging his arm. Despite the years that had passed, Bulma's determined spirit shone through. Her hair was streaked with gray, and lines of worry marked her face, but she still carried the same grace and energy Celia remembered. Bulma glanced up, her eyes brightening. "Celia, you're back," she said, relief in her voice. "How'd it go?" "As well as I could have hoped," Celia replied, setting down her belonging. "I talked to you and Kakarot in the past, told them everything about the androids. I think they'll take the threat seriously and train as hard as they can." She hesitated, her brow furrowing. "But I don't know if it'll be enough." Bulma stood and brushed her hands off on her pants. "There's no way to know for sure," she admitted, her tone gentle, "but it was worth a try."
Celia frowned. Shouldn't things here change if we altered the past? Bulma shook her head slowly. It doesn't work like that. That's why we didn't use the time machine sooner. When you went back, the timeline split the moment you made a change. That version of the past is no longer connected to our present. Whatever happens there won't affect us here. Celia's shoulders sagged. Then why did you let me go back at all? Bulma placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Because, she said softly, even if it doesn't save our time, it might save someone else's. At least one version of our world can be spared this nightmare. Celia took a deep breath, her jaw tightening as she absorbed Bulma's words. "I get it," she said finally, "but it's hard to think about everything staying the same here, no matter what I do." "I know," Bulma said quietly. "Believe me, I know." Celia looked around the room, her thoughts briefly drifting to their missing allies. "Have you heard anything about Trunks?" Bulma sighed, crossing her arms. "The androids worked him over pretty badly. He barely made it back here after you left, but he's alive, recovering in the medbay." Relief flickered in Celia's eyes. "That's good, at least. I don't know what I'd do if we lost him too." She turned back to Bulma, her expression hardening with determination. "I'm going back again," she declared, her voice steady. "What?" Bulma asked, her voice laced with both confusion and worry. "I'm going back," Celia repeated firmly. "I'm going to train with the others to fight the androids. If I can spend a few years training in the past, I think I can make a real difference, and it'll make me stronger." Bulma frowned, her hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. "What if you don't make it?" she asked, her voice softening. "What if you don't come back?" Celia looked down for a moment before answering, her tone unwavering. "It won't matter then," she said plainly. "We don't have much hope of beating the androids here anyway, but if I can help in the past, at least one timeline can be saved." Before Bulma could respond, a voice rang out from the hallway. "I'm going with you." Celia and Bulma both turned toward the doorway to see a tall, broad-shouldered young man stepping into the room. He looked about 18, dressed in jeans and a capsule corp jacket over a black t-shirt. A sword strapped to his back glinted faintly under the dim bunker lights. His purple hair stood in spiky disarray, a trait he'd inherited from his father. "Trunks!" Celia gasped, running toward him. She threw her arms around him in a tight embrace. "I thought you were a goner." Trunks chuckled softly, patting her back. "Come on," he said, though his voice carried a note of fatigue. "Bardock trained me better than that." Despite his confident words, he couldn't deny to himself that the androids had come dangerously close to finishing him off. If they hadn't been toying with him, he wouldn't be standing here. Pulling back from the hug, Trunks looked at Celia seriously. "So you're going to the past?" he asked. Celia nodded. "Yeah, I'm going to train with my father, your father, and your brother for 2 years. I want to be ready to help them fight the androids in the past. Trunks nodded slowly. I gathered as much from what you were saying. He folded his arms across his chest. And I'm going with you. One problem, Bulma interjected, stepping between them. The time machine only has one seat. Trunks smirked slightly. I think we can squeeze in there, Mom. Celia gave him a sly smile. I don't mind the closeness, she teased. It's not like we haven't been close before. She leaned in and gave him a quick peck on the lips, her tone light despite the heavy decision ahead.
Bulma raised an eyebrow but chose not to comment, sighing instead. Trunks turned to Celia, determination shining in his eyes. We'll leave in the morning. The time machine shimmered into existence, materializing in the courtyard of Capsule Corp with a faint hum. The lush greenery, bright flowers, and pristine buildings stood in stark contrast to the desolate wasteland Celia and Trunks had left behind. It had been a year since Celia's first trip to the past, at least for the others. For her and Trunks, only a day had passed since they'd departed. Trunks stepped out first, taking in the vibrant scene around him. The clear blue sky, the warm sun, and the lively buzz of birds made him pause. It's so beautiful here, he said, his voice tinged with awe.
Celia followed, nodding in agreement. Yeah, she said softly, her eyes scanning the untouched landscape. The last time she'd arrived, it had been the middle of the night, and she hadn't been able to take in the full view. Now, seeing everything bathed in sunlight, it was overwhelming how alive and intact this world was.
Welcome back, a familiar voice greeted them.
Celia turned to see Kakarot standing in the courtyard, his arms folded and a warm smile on his face. He was dressed in his usual fighting uniform, but now he also wore the personal gravity belt and bands Bulma had given him. Hi, Celia said, stepping forward. I'd like you to meet your youngest son, Trunks. Kakarot's smile widened, and he let out a soft chuckle. I've met him before, he joked lightly, when he was just a baby. Trunks stepped forward, extending his hand. Kakarot took it, but immediately pulled him into a firm hug instead. Trunks stiffened at first, but relaxed, caught off guard by the warmth of the gesture. I'm proud of you, Kakarot said, his voice steady but kind. He pulled back, gripping Trunks' shoulders and looking him in the eye. You've grown into a fine young man. Thanks, father, Trunks said, a little awkwardly. Standing face to face with Kakarot felt surreal. His mother had told him so much about his father, his strength, his kindness, his unwavering resolve, but actually meeting him was something else entirely. Everything she'd described was spot on. I decided to come and help as much as I could, Trunks added, trying to hide his nervousness. Kakarot gave him a warm smile. I'm glad to see you. From the way Celia talked, I was worried you might have been in trouble.
Trunks blushed, scratching the back of his head. Yeah, well, I kinda lost it when Bardock died. I tried to take on the androids myself. It didn't go so well. He let out a humorless laugh. Luckily, they were in a good mood and let me live. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Kakarot's smile softened. He placed a hand on Trunks' shoulder. What's important is that you're here now. We'll start training in the morning, but for now, let's catch up and get some food. You must be starving. Elsewhere in Capsule Corp, Vegeta stepped out of the gravity chamber, his body drenched in sweat and his muscles aching from hours of relentless training. He had practically lived in the chamber for the past year, pushing himself harder and harder in his effort to catch up to Kakarot and Raditz. The thought of those two achieving the legendary Super Saiyan form before him was a constant thorn in his pride. How could they ascend while I, the Prince of all Saiyans, still remained stuck? Vegeta seethed inwardly. Worse, no matter how hard he trained, it felt like his progress was slowing. He made his way toward the showers, eager to clean up and reset his focus, but his path was blocked by an all-too-familiar voice. Vegeta, Chi-Chi called, stepping into the hallway. What is it, woman? Vegeta replied, his tone sharp but not entirely hostile. While he found Earthwomen generally irritating, Chi-Chi wasn't entirely unpleasant, especially when she wasn't interrupting his training. Kakarot wants to see you about something, she said simply, and lunches. Vegeta paused, his scowl softening slightly at the mention of food. Despite himself, he had to admit it was convenient having someone around who prepared meals between his intense training sessions.
Fine, he said, giving a curt nod. The shower can wait. He followed Chi-Chi to the kitchen, where a spread of food was already set out on the table. Without hesitation, Vegeta sat down and began eating, his appetite as fierce as ever. Chi-Chi soon returned with their infant daughter, cradling the tiny girl in one arm while preparing a bottle with her free hand. Once ready, she sat across from Vegeta and began feeding the hungry Saiyan baby.
As he tore into his meal, Vegeta glanced up. "What does Kakarot want?" he asked between bites. "Bulma didn't say," Chi-Chi replied. "She just mentioned that it's something important, something that concerns all of us." Vegeta frowned, his chewing slowing as he processed her words. He wasn't fond of Kakarot, not just because it stung his pride to admit that the other Saiyan was stronger than him, but because Kakarot's easygoing nature grated on his nerves. However, Vegeta also knew that Kakarot wasn't one to raise the alarm without good reason. "Fine," Vegeta said finally. "I'll see him after my shower." Chi-Chi smiled faintly, her attention returning to the infant in her arms. "Okay, dear," she said, her tone light but calm. Vegeta returned to his food, his mind already turning over what this meeting could mean. Kakarot leaned back against the courtyard wall, his arms crossed and his face calm. He had been relaxing, enjoying the quiet moment, but his expression changed slightly when he noticed Vegeta descending from the sky. The Saiyan Prince landed with precision, his stance rigid and his scowl firmly in place. "Hey Vegeta," Kakarot greeted, his tone friendly but direct. "What do you want?" Vegeta snapped, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Well," Kakarot began, deciding to get straight to the point. "There's a serious threat coming in 2 years." Vegeta raised an eyebrow, his tone cutting. "What threat?" "5 incredibly strong androids," Kakarot replied. "They'll attack Earth, and if we're not ready, they'll destroy everything." Vegeta scoffed, folding his arms. "Why don't you and your Super Saiyan brother handle it yourselves?" His words dripped with venom. "We're not strong enough," Kakarot said, simply, his face serious. That response made Vegeta pause. It wasn't like Kakarot to admit weakness, and the gravity in his tone couldn't be ignored. For a moment, Vegeta just stared at him, his pride battling with the realization that this wasn't just a bluff. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" Vegeta asked, his frustration bleeding into his voice. "You need to become a Super Saiyan," Kakarot said. Vegeta's jaw tightened. "You think I haven't been trying to do that already?"
"There's more to it than just training in the gravity room," Kakarot explained. "You've been pushing your body to the limit, but I'll bet you've noticed something. Your strength isn't increasing anymore." Vegeta's silence was all the confirmation Kakarot needed. The prince didn't like to admit weakness, but the truth was undeniable. Lately, no matter how hard he trained, his power had plateaued.
"You need to break through," Kakarot said. "Your body's ready for the transformation, but strength alone won't get you there. When I transformed, it wasn't just because I was angry at Frieza for killing my son. It was because I needed to get stronger. If I didn't, we all would have died." "I was there," Vegeta snapped, his voice rising. "You don't need to lecture me about Frieza."
Kakarot held up a hand to calm him. "That's not my point. What I'm saying is that you're training alone. It won't create the need for you to transform." Vegeta's glare darkened. "So what's your point, Kakarot?"
Kakarot didn't answer immediately. Instead, his black hair shimmered, turning into golden spikes as he ascended into his Super Saiyan form. Without warning, he darted forward, his knee smashing into Vegeta's face with blinding speed. The force sent Vegeta flying backward, his body flipping through the air. "What's the idea?" Vegeta snarled, rubbing his jaw as he steadied himself in midair. Kakarot smirked faintly. "Guess I forgot to explain. You're going to become a Super Saiyan or die trying." Before Vegeta could respond, Kakarot was on him again. His fist shot forward, burying itself into Vegeta's stomach with devastating power. Vegeta coughed violently, spitting up blood as he doubled over in pain. "Kakarot, you fool!" Vegeta managed to shout, but his words were cut off by Kakarot's roundhouse kick. The blow connected with his arms as he tried to block, but the force was overwhelming. It sent Vegeta flying across the rocky landscape, his body digging a deep trench into the ground. Hovering in the air, Kakarot held his hand out, a ball of glowing energy forming in his palm. "This blast is strong enough to kill you," he said, his tone sharp and unyielding. "You better transform if you want to live."